Hi, Kevin. It's so nice to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. You and I have met once before. We had some technology glitches,
Yeah,
so we're meeting again for the second time, and I'm
that's right.
grateful we are.
That's right. And thank you for coming again. Thanks for your
Of course.
understanding, man. Okay, Kevin,
Of course.
yeah, the previous time we met, the audience didn't have the opportunity to listen to your wisdom due to the technical glitches and all of that. But I experienced, those insights. So I just can't wait for the audience also to benefit from your amazing insight. So
I
I want,
appreciate that.
yeah, man, I want you to let's get started with your story, the challenges that you faced, and how you overcame them. And afterwards, we dive in straight into the questions. Okay, Kevin, over
That
to
sounds
you.
perfect. Yeah, so I was raised by my mom and my grandmother. I didn't know my dad. I didn't meet my dad until I was 27. So obviously that played a role and continues to play a role in the man that you see in front of you today. Grew up without a lot of money, so that became something that I was focused on, but I never really knew how to get. And I was the type of person who didn't enjoy school. I didn't enjoy learning. I just didn't, it wasn't my cup of tea. So after high school, I decided to not go to college. And all my friends went off to college, and then I got a job at the local gas station. And I started pumping gas. And that was my first real full-time job. And from there, I was a personal trainer. I was a truck driver. I was a forklift operator. I was in construction. I cleaned floors and bathrooms at a hospital. I did many, many, many different things. But I eventually got a job in an industry called weatherization. And all weatherization is, for us at least, we would go into large state-owned buildings, so usually schools, and it was our job to make those buildings more energy efficient. Since I was working for the state in the United States, depending on what state I was in, I would make anywhere from $60 an hour to $120 an hour. And for me, that was at least four times more than I had ever made my entire life. So I thought when I got this job, this was going to be the key to my happiness. I'd be quote unquote successful. And this was it. This is what I've been waiting for my entire life. So I did that job for a few years. And if you were to look at me from the outside, looking in when I was 25, you would see a young man who had a high-paying job. My girlfriend at the time was a model. I was getting ready to compete in a bodybuilding show, so I was in the best shape of my life. I had a sports car. I had a new apartment. I had all the external measures of success. But internally, I was very self-conscious. I was more depressed than I realized. I was more anxious than I realized. I was more internally misguided than I realized. And my girlfriend ended up leaving me because I was just a shell of myself. I wasn't a very supportive partner. I wasn't a very constructive partner. And when she left, that was my initial rock bottom. I hit rock bottom after she left. But I fell into the trap again of thinking, well, maybe I just haven't made enough money. If I make more money, it'll fix most of these problems. So that next year, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to make the most money I'd ever made my entire life. And I did. I spent the next 10 months living in hotels, traveling up and down the East Coast of the United States, working all over the place, but making really good money. So we get to the end of that year. I have my final pay stub in hand. I slip open this pay stub, and I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree. The expectation was it was going to fix all of my internal stuff that I had going on. That was not the case. I realized that for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously. That was the realization I got. You're living unconsciously. You don't know why you're doing what you're doing. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I ended up starting a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And I fell in love with podcasting. It was the best. I just couldn't imagine doing anything that I enjoyed more than that. I started hating my job because I didn't want to go to work anymore. I didn't want to travel. I know the money's not going to fix my problems. So I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job site early. I start showing up late. And eventually it got to the point where my mental health was just spiraling. I was in a really, really bad spot. So we were working in New Jersey, which is like 6 hours from where I lived. I lived in New Hampshire at the time. And one morning, my alarm went off, and I sat up, and I slid to the edge of the bed in this crusty, dirty hotel room. And the best way to explain it is there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was just on a different station. And one was saying, you're stuck at this job forever. People like you don't get opportunities like this. Never mind, leave them behind. You are so lucky to have this job. Do not mess this up. If you did leave this job, what would your friends think? You make more money than any of your friends, and that was still important to me. There was significance there. What would your family think? I was more successful than anybody in my family had ever been. And then the biggest thing, the loudest thing, the hardest thing was, do you really think you're going to be a podcaster? That's what we're going to do. We're going to leave this job and we're going to go all in on podcasting. Doesn't seem super realistic. And in that moment, I thought to myself, well, if I was just to take my life, I would take all my problems with me. And I wouldn't have to worry about fixing any of this. And I wouldn't have to worry about finding a new job and finding happiness and finding fulfillment. And that was the darkest, deepest hole I've ever been in, for sure. Luckily, I had, and I still do, I have wonderful people in my life. So I reached out to one of those wonderful people, and he's now my business partner and the co-host of the podcast. And I explained to him what was going on. And I said, I'm having these thoughts, I'm having these feelings, I don't know what to do. And he said, Kev, over the last couple years, your awareness has changed a ton, but your environments have remained the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. A very, very wise piece of advice. And I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later. And then I became a very, very, very broke entrepreneur trying to figure out how to turn a podcast into a business. And it took many, many moons to get to where we are. But I left my job in 2018. And now we have 1,755 episodes, over 1 million listens, and listeners in 170 some odd countries. So I quite literally am living my dream. But what it took to get here was a nightmare, for sure.
Oh man, oh man, oh man. You know, the part where you mentioned that you reached that, that's a key stuff. You know, many people who are stuck up in a situation that is not fair, they do not know the importance of reaching out. And now, just by what you said, I bet it is going to help those ones who are stuck in any situation to always reach out, not just to anybody, but to someone who you feel like can, like you mentioned, a wise advice. And the advice alone, helped you change your location and to the glory of God. You're living your dream. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yes,
really,
thank you.
really inspiring. That's very inspiring. I love that. I love that. You went after your fulfillment and not some sort of temporary feeling that, that's beautiful. Okay, so let us get started with the question, shall we, Kevin?
Please, please.
All right. So why is consistency so important? Can you talk to us about it?
Yeah, I can. It's almost impossible to win without consistency. Consistency means you showing up and doing the things that you believe are ultimately necessary for your long-term success, even if you don't really feel like it in the moment. So there's a couple reasons why it's important. One, when you are consistent in something, it becomes your identity. But that's also a dangerous game. If somebody is drinking every single day, that's their behavior, they're consistently drinking, they might take on the identity of, I am somebody who drinks too much, potentially I am an alcoholic or whatever it may be. If somebody goes to the gym every day, they're consistent in exercise and fitness and well-being and health and physical health and all that stuff, their identity is probably going to be, yeah, I'm a very active person. Those are two completely different lives, because what you say about yourself is often what you end up doing. So consistency is a really, really important step to building external success, because it's how often can you show up and do the things that you know you should be doing. But it also really helps us internally because it determines who we become. Our identities are how we see ourselves. And the things that we do affect the way we see ourselves, and the way we see ourselves affects the things that we do. So it's not just important from an external, but consistency is super important for our identity. I always use this example or this analogy because I think it helps consistency land. If somebody said to me, Kevin, I will give you $1 million if you're able to do the splits, like gymnastics style splits, by this time next year. I can't do the splits right now. Bad things would happen if I tried. But if somebody offered me $1 million, what would be the best course of action in order for me to be able to do the splits by this time next year? To do it as consistently as humanly possible. To do it every single day, little by little by little. If I only did it once a week, that's only 52 opportunities for growth. But if I do it every day, it's 365 opportunities for growth. So I think the splits is a really good analogy of why, or example, I don't know if it's really an analogy, an example of the importance of consistency. Because if I do it more often than you, I'm going to get the $1 million and you're not, or I might get the $1 million faster in this example.
Great. I got that. Beautiful. That was a great response. I love
Thank
that. Okay. Let's say someone asks you, hey, Kevin, can someone really succeed without struggle? What would your response be?
I would say that the level of your struggle is going to be directly connected to the level of the size of your goals. So if you want to get to 1,750 episodes like we have, you're going to struggle a lot more than somebody who just wants to get to 17 or 170. And 170, you're going to struggle a lot more than 17. So I think a lot of us are trying to avoid struggle. We're trying to avoid resistance. We're trying to avoid challenge. And that's actually creating more long-term challenge in your life. I think every single one of us is going to deal with some struggle, even if it's not chosen struggle. Life is going to happen. Unfortunately, tragedies are going to happen. Unfortunately, you're going to lose people in some way, shape, or form. You're going to get hurt. Things aren't always going to go our way. And I think struggle is a piece of that. But your goals that you're choosing are determining how much you're gonna struggle. I'm struggling way more than I ever thought I was going to. But my goals have also gotten bigger and bigger and bigger as I believed more and more and more in myself. So yeah, the simplest answer is I think your struggle is directly correlated with the size of your goals. And that's why setting appropriate sized goals is so important. Because you might not want to struggle as much as I have to get to where I want to get to, but you also might not want to get 1,700 episodes in. It all depends. It all depends on what the ultimate goal is. But yeah, that's the simplest answer that I could give.
I got that. It all depends on what the ultimate goal is. That's amazing. Okay, let's get personal a bit. What was your biggest fear, and how did you overcome it?
My biggest fear still is failure. And when I say failure, I mean not just failing as a human being and not accomplishing what I want, but I'm afraid of getting an opportunity and then letting someone down. Just not being enough. My biggest fear is not being enough. Just not being good enough, not being smart enough, not being capable enough, letting someone down. And honestly, it's one of the hardest things to overcome because the only way to really overcome it is just to do things over and over and over and over and over again externally. Internally, I've worked a lot on figuring out, well, where does that fear actually come from? Where does that wound actually come from? So the external recipe for me has been determine what you're afraid of and then determine what is a realistic amount for you to face that fear. So if you're afraid of heights, jumping out of a plane probably isn't the right answer yet. But maybe climbing up on a ladder is the first step. And then it's taking an elevator to the 10th floor balcony. And then it's going to a skyscraper. And then it's whatever, going to the edge of a mountain, hypothetically. And then getting in a plane. And then maybe eventually, 20 years down the line, you do some skydiving. But for me, it was always figuring out, okay, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of this. How do I make those fears smaller? And then practice the behavior, exposure therapy. So I did that for a long time. And then it was, okay, why am I so afraid of disappointing people? What does that mean? What does that mean about me? Why am I so afraid of letting people down? Why am I so afraid of looking bad? Why am I so afraid of it's happening again? My rut-row. All right. What else we got? Ba-ba-ba-ba. Ha! Yes. We're back in business.
So sorry.
You're good. You're good. I
Okay,
remember where I was if you just
um,
want me to start.
oh, let's continue, please. Go ahead.
Good? All right, here we go.
Yeah.
Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. So I asked myself, why am I so afraid of all of these things? And then I just continued to try to push the comfort zone, push the comfort zone, push the comfort zone. But I think anytime we're talking about something that we're really afraid of, like our deepest fear or the thing that holds us back the most, it's as much an external game as it is an internal game. There are things to do and to practice, and there are things to look at internally and to reflect on. And I think that's why facing fears is so hard, because it's not just external, it's not just internal, it's kind of a mixture of both.
Got that. Okay. The second to the last question, Kevin. What is self-awareness and why is it so important?
One of my favorite questions in the world. Self-awareness is your ability to understand who you are, why you do what you do, and how you've ended up where you are in life. And I know that sounds very, very heavy, but if we just think of awareness as an understanding, awareness is how much we know about something. The reason so many of us bring our cars to the mechanic is because we're not aware of how to fix it. The reason when our computers break, a lot of us, myself included, reach out to somebody who knows technology way better than us is because we don't have the awareness of how to fix it. Self-awareness is the understanding of why you run the way you run. And the reason it's so important is because you are going to live through this vessel of yourself for your entire human existence. And if you don't know why you're behaving the way you're behaving, it's very hard to change the behavior. Knowing what triggers you, knowing why you react in certain situations, knowing why you're afraid of what you're afraid of, knowing your core values, your core beliefs, your core aspirations. Oh no, we lost again. Core aspirations was the last thing. Oh, we're back. Here we go. All right, ready? Okay. And core values, core beliefs. Okay. Knowing
Yeah.
your core, good. Knowing your
Yeah.
core beliefs, your core values, your core aspirations, those are all very, very important things to understand because that is what determines alignment. So if somebody comes to me and says, I'm unhappy or I'm unfulfilled or whatever it is, the first thing that I'm going to ask is, well, what makes you happy and what makes you feel fulfilled? And that's just all self-awareness. It's very hard to shift anything if you're not aware of why the thing is the way it is in the first place. So self-awareness is the understanding of yourself, and the importance of it is you are going to live your entire human existence as yourself. So the more you know about yourself, the more influence you have on your life, ultimately.
Amazing. You know, our conversation is very, very educative, inspiring, and interesting because you've got some incredible insights. You know,
Thank you. I
that's
appreciate it.
amazing, Kevin. Yeah. So, to bring this to an end, Kevin, what would you like to leave the audience with, like your final thought? And to those ones who love to reach out to you, learn more about what you do, how can that be possible?
I would start with a quote because this is a quote that has shaped me in many, many, many ways. Your reality becomes the parts of your imagination that you hold on to and pour into the longest. When I first started this journey, I said to myself, if I could podcast for a living, if I could be my own boss, if I could wake up when I want, I could go to sleep when I want, go to the gym when I want, if I could be my own boss and I could do this thing, I would be so happy, so fulfilled. I would feel like I'm growing and contributing. That would be the dream for me. And every day for the last 7 years, I've poured into that. And I've held on to that belief. And I've kept working at it and I've kept working at it. But a lot of things I've let go. There's certain things that I stopped pouring into and I stopped practicing every day and I stopped believing because it just didn't serve me. But I held on to the dream. I held on to the imagination. So in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, your life is going to look drastically different than it does today. It's just going to be whether it's on purpose or by accident. So I always like to leave with that quote just because that's something that I guess that thought process has always really helped me. If you enjoyed what we talked about, we talk about this on our podcast often. I have a podcast called The Next Level University. We're on all the podcast platforms. We're on YouTube as well. And if you ever need anything, you can shoot me a message. My handle on Instagram is @NeverQuitKid. So questions, comments, concerns, need somebody to listen, shoot me a message.
Beautiful, beautiful. So that's going to be the end of the show, Kevin. Thank you for coming and thank you for, your understanding because this
My
is your
pleasure.
second appearance here. Yeah. Thank you so much.